Now back to the latest with the coronavirus. An Associated Press analysis has found many governors across the U.S. are disregarding or creatively interpreting White House guidelines in easing their state's lockdown measures. The AP determined that 17 states have not experienced a 14-day downward trajectory in new cases or infection rates, a key benchmark set by the White House, and yet many of those are moving forward with reopening plans. While other states, like Georgia, because of the broad way in which the guidelines are written, have technically managed to meet the criteria to reopen, despite not seeing those declines in cases. The AP reports out that the White House has not been specific about how states should calculate the 14-day downward trajectory. Depending on how you calculate it, a state might pass or fail. Meanwhile, President Trump yesterday again placed the responsibility on the governors.
20 states, by the account of multiple organizations right now, that haven't met the guidelines that you set here, have either partially or completely reopened. What do you say to those states that haven't met the guidelines that are already starting that process now?
We've looked at all of them. We've spoken to many of the governors, most of the governors. As you know, we give leeway to the governors, and these are governors that have done a good job in, I think, all cases. I have some that I don't think are doing a particularly good job. But for the most part, they have, and these governors have, and we give them the leeway. The governors have great power as to that given by us. We want them to do that. We rely on them. We trust them, and hopefully they're making the right decisions.
Let's bring in NBC News correspondent Hans Nichols. He is live for us at the White House. Hans, good morning. Every signal the president and the White House have given to the states and to the country is that it is time to turn the page. Remember, earlier this week, they talked about winding down the task force. The president later amended that to say, well, we're still going to have it, but it's changing its focus away from the public health side of it and toward the economic side of it. So what is the White House saying directly to states, if anything at all?
It depends on the day, really. They are saying sometimes you need to follow the guidelines. Remember, April 16th, when those guidelines came out, those gating criteria, the language was states must pass these certain thresholds before they can start opening up. Remember, 3 phases. But all the rhetoric from the White House and the president specifically is about flexibility. When you talk to individuals, senior administration officials, junior administration officials throughout, everyone wants this to be a state-led effort. Part of that has to do with sometimes their commitment to federalism, but it also has to do with a little bit of political blame shifting. They want the states to really own this because they think they're in the best place, the best position really to figure out what's going on. We saw a version of this yesterday when that CDC report, the White House said they sent back for revisions to the CDC. The White House really wants this to be at a state level, and when you look at what the CDC is trying to do, they want it to be national. And that tension was really exposed yesterday. Now, the clearest we heard was from Dr. Birx last night saying that they think that CDC document needs more edits. Well, edits and rejections, at least in my view, and my experience as a journalist, tend to be the same thing, guys.
So, Hans, what are Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci either saying or at least thinking as they watch the president this week say explicitly when he was in Arizona, in fact, we've got to move on. We've got to move past this, despite the fact that cases are going up across the country. We've crossed 75,000 deaths. Yes, they've come down in hot spots like New York City, but it's spreading across the country. What do the doctors on that task force think as they hear the president say, time to move on?
They seem to be in broad agreement. There's not a lot of daylight that we're picking up between Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci. Now, I say that, and in moments, there's going to be a tweet that one of them is leading the task force. But the president seems to be embracing them. They seem to be giving the president the kind of advice he wants to hear, and that is that you can stay ahead of this virus's spread by the sentinel testing, by going in and having certain testing regimens to make sure it doesn't pop back up, that you can do contact tracing, and that you don't need a test every day. Of course, we saw the White House and the president himself say something different yesterday, and that is that everyone near him is going to be tested now on a daily basis. I just walked in here to the White House. Their new questionnaires that they're asking even reporters coming in on what sort of symptoms they might be presenting. So The tension is that, and you heard this from the press secretary, they don't think testing on a daily basis or a broad basis is good for the rest of the country, but clearly that's the new protocol here at the White House. Willie?
Yeah, real quick, Hans, too. We got reporting from you guys yesterday that a personal valet, somebody who's around the president quite a bit, has tested positive for coronavirus. Has that changed the president's view? He's that close, maybe wearing a mask or actually observing social distancing in the White House?
There doesn't seem to be a change on the mask policy, and that is an individual policy. That said, the president announced yesterday that he'd be tested every day as opposed to more sporadically. So the testing regimen may change, but in terms of how people are behaving in the White House, as far as we can tell, that hasn't changed, guys.
All right. NBC's Hans Nichols at the White House. Hans, thanks as always. Mika?
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.